My name is Mano Barkovich, and this is my infographics about SpaceX. Throughout my infographics, I will be using this as my color model, this as my typography model, this as my visual language model, and finally, this as my layout model. My first element I would like to focus on is the appearance element. The purpose of this infographic is to introduce and share knowledge to the people who would like to know more about the foundation, innovation, and the goals of SpaceX. This will be one of the introductory segments right after the timeline section, which focuses on capturing the observer's attention by visuals and carefully modeled rockets. The general information that this element will resonate is the success rate of the Falcon 9 rockets, which as of May 2017 it is 95%. Then a quick look at the numbers of the never been done before orbital class rocket landing back to Earth and also the number of reflown first stages. The next subsegment focuses on expressing the goals that the SpaceX is planning to accomplish in the near future, that being landing on Mars for the first time and to make humans a multiplanetary species. The next one is the problems and failures that SpaceX experienced throughout its track, such as rapid uncontrolled disintegration, RUD for short, near bankruptcies and the delays to the missions that the RUDs caused. Finally, the achievement segment, which highlights what seemed to be impossible just a few years ago, yet SpaceX achieved all of these in just the past 2 years, such as the first ever reflight of an orbit-class liquid rocket booster, the Dragon capsule, first successful landing of an orbital-class booster on a drone ship, and a landing pad. Next, let me explain how the appearance element exploits the visual potential of appearance. First, let's focus on the donut chart, where the orange field represents all of the successful rockets that SpaceX has launched since its foundation. This is approximately 95% of the chart, while the rest 5% filled with blue represents the rockets that failed to launch or deliver the payload. Inside of the donut chart, a clipboard is present to show that this is a statistical data, while the description above explains the visuals. In order to summarize the uniqueness of the Falcon 9, I illustrated it by showcasing the first stage in a landing configuration, which then connected by an orange statistics bar. The last chart is encapsulated in a blue box, which is a segment using dashed lines to differentiate it from each of these categories. Finally, the top section, the header, for the first word of the subtitle is illuminated with the white light to resonate it with my visual language model and in order to highlight the keywords that best describes each of the elements within the SpaceX infographics. To emulate my color model, I labeled the subtitle and the description fonts white and blue, which is an alternating occurrence throughout the visual language and the color model I was emulating. The first of the subtitle is illuminated with a soft yet vibrant light to produce within the layout. Then the donut chart is filled in an orange to emulate one of the frequently used colors, which is also creates a balance between the different shades of orange and blue. Goals are colored light blue to simulate the bright and hopeful future of SpaceX. Then problems are colored with orange, which correlates to explosions and errors. Then finally, achievements are colored white to represent success. The points below achievements are filled with white that also illuminates a soft light and bordered with light gray to encapsulate the light. To emulate my visual language model, I created a donut chart that is very similar to the one represented in my visual language model, with nearly the same size and weight. The orange encapsulation around the rocket is emulating the tracing around the battery in the visual language model that connected to your text box by a line that further describes the number of landings and reuse stages SpaceX has achieved. The categories inside of the blue box have similar icons to represent each of the segments, thus goals have a 10 check mark, problems have a 10 X, then achievements have a trophy with a rocket inside of it to be more creative. These segments are also divided by blue dashed lines to make it easier to separate each of the categories and to represent an elegant and minimalistic environment. To emulate my typography model, these elements are using the pragmatic font throughout the element and also using the consistent text size and weight to match the description of each of the segments. All of the texts are colored white except 95%, which is the colored orange, in order to show the weight and the importance of that percentage, while the title holds the largest font size to magnify of what each of the elements are demonstrating. Next is my relationship element. The following model illustrates the process that is a critical component for SpaceX to build, test, launch, and relaunch their rockets. This network diagram illustrates the process that the Falcon 9 must go through before the launch. All of the components are manufactured in Hawthorne, California, then it's transported to McGregor, Texas for testing and checking, and finally it's transported to either Vandenberg Air Force Base in California or the launch complex in Cape Canaveral for static fire, payload integration, and then launch. On the x-axis, time is represented, which divides each of these three categories into their own section. The first chart is broken up into two segments. One of them is component, which includes the grid fins, the MVAC engine, the fairings, landing legs, and the first stage. These are all shipped to the second stage facility in McGregor. The second one is the booster manufacturing, where it shows the process of the sheet metal being wrapped around the Falcon 9, which essentially makes it a core production. Then finally, the Merlin engines are coupled into the Octaweb and known as the engine integration. And once everything is put together, the paintings and insignia decorations happening, and finally the stage also gets shipped to test site McGregor. The next segment is also separated by two columns. First one is the second stage test, where the engine arrives, then it's being test fired to make sure the quality is right. Then the engine integration to the second stage happens, and it once again gets test fired to make sure that all of the structures are intact and ready to go. Then there's the other section, which is the first stage test. This is simply just holding down the booster and then test fire to see how it performs. All of these gets shipped to the final destination, which is the preparations and sequence to launch. In the last stage, all of the components and stages arrive to the launch complex. The first process is the integration of the payload and encapsulating it into the fairings, then attaching it to the second stage, which then gets attached to the booster. Then the Falcon 9 gets shipped to the strong bag, where they test fired once again just to see how it's going to perform. And once everything is nominal, then the liftoff happens. I also included the Falcon Heavy model because it has to go through the same processes, and essentially it is made out of 3 Falcon 9 boosters. Throughout the process, I made sure to attach a legend in the lower right corner. The arrow represents its transportation, which you can see in each of the thin lines between the stages. Next up is the straight line, which represents the department division. Every single stages must happen in different locations within the same location. Thus, these are divided by either buildings or just different areas within the same environment. The last one is an arrow with the line attached, which shows the attachment points guide. This is a process that I choose to show in order to one element being attached to one other element. One example for this is the engine being attached to the second stage, and I show this with an arrow pointing towards to it. To show my color model, I use the same colors as I use in my location map. The orange represents the SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. The green one represents the testing sites in McGregor, Texas, and a launching facility is represented by blue, which either is in Cape Canaveral, Florida, or Vandenberg, California. I also created a different layout where I integrated all of the rockets into the same page, which is shown here. This allowed me to figure all of the pieces as Legos. That way I can integrate each of the stages into their own components, switching off either the Dragon capsule or the fairing, or the stages that has landing legs and grid fins, or to the ones that are not. This helped me to really put my relationship model all in together, especially using so much different pieces. The rockets are also using two counter elements. One of them is lighting, which is a soft light right behind the layers. The second is the shadows, which almost every component has. This creates a 3D feel to all of these segments and components. Finally, my typography model is relevant to my appearance model as well, giving it the same weight, size, and color. The next element is my time element. The following time element model illustrates the timeline that is a critical component for SpaceX history and how it was built up to a superior private rocket company. SpaceX was founded by Elon Musk in 2002, but they haven't started producing rockets until 2006. It was then when Falcon 1 had its first flight. Unfortunately, the first 3 launches were unsuccessful. The fourth try changed everything when they incorporated the four-leaf clover design into their patches as a good luck charm symbol, and the launch was finally successful, propelling the company forward. In 2010, NASA also gave them a contract to supply cargo to the International Space Station, which essentially saved the company from going bankrupt. SpaceX started producing Dragon capsules that could dock to the ISS, while also developing a much more advanced rocket called the Falcon 9 that would serve as the flagship platform for the Dragon and private satellite launches. They wanted to achieve a way to make rockets affordable and easy to produce, essentially making them reusable. SpaceX made history in 2015 when they successfully landed Falcon 9's first stage back on land, making it the first vertical landing on an orbital-class rocket. Since then, there has been 9 landings on barges on the ocean and at Landing Zone 1. 2 years after, in 2017, SpaceX yet achieved to make another history by successfully reusing a landed stage and land it again. Now the ultimate goal is to fully reuse all stages of the rocket, including the fairings, and also to travel around the moon in 2018 and reach Mars by 2020. As you can see, the x-axis represents time, where I also had 3 different layers attaching it to the whole element. The one is the geostationary Earth orbit, where all of the satellites SpaceX launch. Then the low Earth orbit, where the space station currently is. This is also where the Dragon capsule gets launched to and docked to. I also illustrated Elon Musk on the far left corner to represent the scale of each of the rockets that SpaceX is currently building. Then all of these rockets are represented in their own category, which can be seen as the Falcon 9, the Falcon 9 1.1, and the Falcon 9 full thrust, which was landing legs and the grid fins to make sure that it lands back on land. I also attached special events that each of the rockets achieved, such as landing the first stage back on land, water, or the first reused first stage that was launched once again. In this segment, I'm using the same models of the Falcon rockets, where I also use a deep blue to represent the color model and my visual language model as a background. I also created special minimalistic designs to further incorporate the similarities that my visual language model has on the header and also the footer. For my color model, I also incorporated 4 different colors. The gray one represents Falcon 1, the green one represents the Falcon 9 1.0, the red one represents the Falcon 9 1.1, and the turquoise color represents the Falcon 9 full thrust. These are encapsulated into a circle, which is present all throughout the time element. For my typography model, the pragmatic font is present. However, for some segments, such as the names of each of the missions and the dates, the text has to be super small. Therefore, this was the reason why I used such a large poster to present all of the text and make sure they are crisp and readable. My first number element represents 3 critical components. First, the y-axis is represented as the amount of kilogram of cargo each of these rockets can deliver to low Earth orbit. Then the x-axis represents the names of the launch vehicles and their height. I incorporated the most widely known rockets around the world to compare them to each other. As you can see, only the SpaceX rockets such as the Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, and the Interplanetary Transport System are colored. The rest of the rockets have a light blue sail hood around them to show that they are not part of SpaceX. Behind each of the rockets, there is a dark blue bar that represents the amount of cargo that they can deliver. As you can see, the Soyuz has the less amount of capabilities to deliver, and also the Falcon 9 and the Falcon Heavy has an incredible amount of cargo that they can deliver compared to the Space Shuttle and the Saturn V. Currently, the ITS, which is the last rocket, is not available. SpaceX is currently trying to fund it, but it really puts a scale of once it succeeds and once it's launchable, then how much it will change the history of the rockets by delivering such a massive amount of cargo into space. On the left side of this segment, I also included the strong back, which SpaceX is using to erect their rocket and hold it down during launch or the static fire. This is only just a visual prop, but during one of my critiques I received that it would be a nice feature to add, especially for my y-axis. For my typography model, the pragmatic is still present. However, I'm using a blue color for my description, just as my color model and my visual language model does. It's an interchanging between every two or three segments that it has. The first part of my second number elements focuses on the different versions of the Dragon and how they compare or differentiate from one another. Dragon is SpaceX's orbital spacecraft and has flown 13 times atop of a Falcon 9 rocket. In December 2010, Dragon became the first privately developed spacecraft to be successfully recovered from orbit. Dragon 2 extends Dragon's ability to carry not only cargo, but crew too. The second part displays the comparative information about the cost of production of a Falcon 9 to really emphasize the benefits SpaceX can offer with the reusability and reduced cost compared to other launch providers. I started with a box chart that is focusing on the same concept, showing the cost of the single launch of the Falcon 9 by breaking down by cost of fuel, cost of rocket materials, and cost of personnel. The statistics prove that currently SpaceX is in the lead of making the most affordable rockets, while the reusable Falcon 9 is even cheaper with a 10% discount. So far there has been only one refurbished launch, with a couple more scheduled for 2017, and eventually SpaceX's goal is to make both the first stage and the second stage, as well with the components, fully reusable. The total cost for production of one of Falcon 9s is approximately 62 million, where the boxes represents the different sizes depending on the cost of these components. As you can see, building the first stage and the 9 Merlin engines is much more expensive than personnel and the fuel costs combined. It really puts a perspective on just how much the engines make up most of the rocket's cost. To emulate my color model, I used a dark blue background color, applied all of the available colors that I could extract from my color model, such as the green, orange, and the light blue, and also used white outlines for the numbers, descriptions, and the titles to emphasize them better on a dark background. To emulate my visual language model, I used the same weight and format for the fractions and the boxes while I followed the placement of each of the descriptions and titles, just like my visual model has it. I also applied a 3D effect for this chart in order to better emphasize my visual language model, which has 3D charts as well. To emulate my typography model, I use the pragmatic font throughout my number element and use the same text size and weight to match the titles, descriptions, and numbers. I tied all of this together by creating a planet that encapsulates the total price of the Falcon 9. This is just an exciting way to show how much it costs making it on planet Earth, because in the future they might making this rocket or iterations of it on Mars. Last but not least, the location element focuses on presenting two concepts. One which shows the map of the United States and specific landmarks locations marked on illustrating key hubs for SpaceX, such as their headquarters, launch sites, satellite offices, and development facilities. Each of these elements are marked by customized spins. It also shows the cross-country route that some of the Falcon 9s are traveling on to get from the headquarters to the development facility where they get tested, then all the way to the launch pad in Cape Canaveral, Florida, or Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. The second map concept focuses on a much more narrowed down field, which illustrates a portion of the Cape Canaveral where the launch and landing of the Falcon 9 takes place. Each of these landmarks are labeled by pointed lines and the arrows illustrates the movement of the rocket, such as launching or landing. My initial thought was to illustrate a map that defines how SpaceX is a domestic company that spans its wings throughout the United States by labeling each of the landmarks that is critical to run the company. Each of the pins are placed in a location where the actual real-life buildings can be found, and these are labeled with icons. Satellite offices are labeled with a satellite design inside of the pin, while the launch facilities are labeled with a rocket. The headquarters is labeled with a factory logo with different machineries. The development facility is shown by a rocket engine, since that's where they are tested at. And then finally, the government facility is labeled by a scientific clipboard, since that's where most of the approval of the projects takes place. For the second element, instead of using a legend, it is rather using direct links to key SpaceX locations throughout the Cape Canaveral. The Cape is home to many launch pads, 20 plus, and most of them were built in Complex 40, which is short for LC-40, and LC-39A, Launch Complex. which is a historical launchpad for Apollo missions and space shuttle launches. SpaceX is also the owner of the first landing zone, short for LZ-1, where the first stage of the Falcon 9 comes back for landing. I illustrated each of these locations by marking with a line showing the launch and landing trajectories, while I also designed demonstrations on how these events look like. For example, the launch trajectory shows the Falcon 9 launching, while the landing trajectory shows the first stage about to land. To emulate my color model, I use a dark blue background for all of my elements to keep it consistent with my overall element throughout my infographic. For the first location element, the United States is colored light blue to give it a healthy amount of contrast, while it's using an orange-filled, white outline paints to highlight specific locations throughout the map. The second location element is using a variety of colors that are presented in my color model. First, the land is filled green, while it's also shaded to the right to give it a sensation to the shore that seeps into the Atlantic Ocean. Here, the roads are colored black, the facilities around the Cape Canaveral are filled with gray, while the launch pads are filled with an egg white color. To represent launch trajectory, I use the orange color due to the engines are going full power and there's flames involved, while I color the landing trajectory light blue, since most of the trip is just gliding back to Earth. To emulate my visual language model, I use the white outline minimalistic icons inside of the pins that represents different locations of SpaceX, while the white outline road represents transition to one place to another. For the second element, I use simplistic illustrations to visually represent each of the trajectories instead of just labeling the lines. The arrow shows the direction in which the rocket is heading, while the white dotted lines describing each of the key launch and landing pads that SpaceX is using. To emulate my typography model, these elements are using the pragmatic font throughout and using the same text size and weight to match the descriptions of the locations and legends. The main description is using a blue colored text, while the sub-description focuses on the facts about the specific events throughout the map is colored orange, and also has a smaller size to show the hierarchy system. My entire infographics is divided into 6 different parts: Falcon Launches, Making History, Mission Control, Process of Manufacturing and Launching, Rockets of the World, and finally, Capabilities and Services. Within my layout, the title section holds the name of the infographics, which is titled SpaceX, and below that is my name to give credibility. Both the header and the footer section of the infographics represents 10 minimalistic sketches of planets, an astronaut, and a landing rocket. In my visual language model, these were represented as lines representing electricity, thus why I went by a more planetary and rocketry approach. Also note that within my color language model, these sketches are orange on top and light blue at the bottom, which is also emulated within my infographics as well. To further increase the accuracy of my emulation of the visual language model, the subtitles for each of the sections starts out with a glowing first word to put an emphasis of what the elements are highlighting. The first word is continued by a shorter, dimmer, and thinner word, finishing off the rest of the subtitle. We can also see that between each of the elements, there's a horizontal divider that illuminates with a glowing white and turquoise light, creating a breathable space throughout my infographics. Overall, this by far was one of my favorite projects I worked on throughout my university career, learning how to enhance my skills with Illustrator and also by allowing me to complete an infographic about SpaceX, which I always wanted to do. One of my most critical advices I would give to incoming Info 360 students is to really focus on getting the right layout model. It would be my first choice to pick, that way I can use it as my template throughout my other models. And finally, I just want to say thank you for this incredible quarter.